down to the budget. The first budget of the Modi government 2.0, and all eyes are on Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, who we just saw there leaving Parliament with the budget papers, and in about an hour from now the speech should be well underway. So we are coming to you live from New Delhi's Meridian Hotel, where we have with us, or we're going to have with us in the next hour, top captains of industry to take us through what they expect from this budget. Is this going to be an incrementalist playing it safe budget, or is this going to see bold new moves by the Modi Sarkar? And let me just go straight across to Mukesh Bhatani. Always great to have you, one of our leading tax experts. Mukesh, so we got some sense of what the government had in mind from the economic survey. 8% growth is being targeted to hit that Prime Minister's target of a $5 trillion economy. Is that realistic?
Well, I think before we get to the larger $5 trillion economy vision, I think it's important to pick up some clues from the economic survey. What is coming out very clearly is that they're not looking at 7 or not of 7% growth rate. They're looking at a decent growth of 7%. The other clues that are coming from the economic survey clearly suggest that whereas the convention that we're going to put more money in the pockets of the people who are going to drive consumption is no longer true. The thrust seems to be increasing exports, increasing investments in infrastructure.
Right.
The economic survey clearly has identified that if $200 billion is the infrastructure spends that is expected, then there is clearly a gap that is evident. So I expect that the budget, rather than working the math on putting more money in the pockets of the taxpayer to drive demand, would be more growth oriented, by virtue of which you will see incremental investment coming in from the private side, from the government side, which would be partly funded by divestment proceeds. There could be the Jalan committee recommendations, which will accept the fact that there has to be payoffs from the RBI to the central government, and largely a growth driven rather than a demand or a consumption driven budget. At least that's what is evident from the economic survey document.
Okay, Vinayak Chatterjee, Chairman Feedback Infra Limited, someone who's sort of a key watcher and player in the infrastructure sector. What did you make of the economic survey's rather optimistic prophecies? Because one view is that, and we're just talking big picture now, the world over, economies are slowing down. The world is turning inward, becoming more protectionist, more tribalist. Can we really achieve that kind of target with the current environment?
See, the central theme proposed in the economic survey is to crankstart the virtuous cycle of growth, and the lever to crankstart that is investment, as Mukesh also said. Now that's the central, after you've dissected the economic survey, that's the central message. Now, with the stress on the fiscal headroom available, which all of us are aware, how much can you subscribe operationally to this policy thesis? So how can the big spends are in infra, the large dollops in investment are not in setting up MSMEs. The large dollops that's going to kickstart the economy is in infra.
And private infra is what the survey is hoping for.
Correct. So therefore, even in the public space, there is asset monetization, tax-free infra bonds, disinvestment, all of that is available in the public space. But that is, the survey says that is not enough. We need private capital. So therefore, what my expectation is that there has to be a PPP version 2, which has to be boldly announced by the government, either in the budget or in subsequent weeks and months.
In simple terms, tell me, what would it mean for someone like you as a player in infra? What is it going to take to get you to invest more?
Look, I think the real issue is the lack of confidence in PPP frameworks, the lack of independent regulation, the lack of a dispute resolution mechanism. All of these are institutional issues as distinct from availability of capital. Capital is not a problem today. The Canadian pension funds and the Norway, all of them are hovering around. But it is the lack of confidence in institutional frameworks which need to be addressed.
Nitin Athole, Office Managing Partner, KPMG India, would you agree with what Vinayak is saying? Because on one hand, it's easy to say, look, invest, and that's going to create this virtual cycle. But some have argued that this is nothing new. This kind of East Asian model of high investment, high savings, export-driven growth is something we've been trying to do for years, but it's not worked out. So what is going to change that?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think the fiscal math is one side in terms of incentives, in terms of, but I think there is also a need to create that confidence. It's not an issue of people not willing to invest, but I think the concerns they have around investments. And I think the institutional issues that Vinayak referred to are not new. We've been talking about it for many years.
Right.
But unfortunately, I don't think it has progressed to the extent that it was necessary. And I think given what the government's vision is in terms of $5 trillion economy, promoting private investment, I think there is a very urgent need to address those very fundamental.
Like, again, break it down in simple terms for the arm viewer, that what in simple terms, when you talk of these institutional issues, regulatory problems, give me an example of what is the problem and how can we fix it?
So I think some of those were identified by Vinayak. So I think there is an issue in terms of whether there is confidence on dispute resolution. I think that's a big issue. The ecosystem, for example, in the infrastructure is pretty much controlled by the government. So you may have an investor who invests in a particular asset, but dependencies on government or government agencies is very high. How is that being dealt with is very critical. I think what we have seen in the past, many of these stressed assets related issues, many are because of those fundamental issues. So I think those are the kind of things. So I think also going beyond infrastructure, I think the level of confidence in the private sector has been low over the last few years, and I think there are a number of issues that the government has to address to promote that, to get private sector to invest.
Vivek Gupta, also from KPMG, would you agree with what you just said? And also, again, just I'm asking you this as Nirmala Sitharaman has reached Parliament, and those are live pictures that are coming in. What could she announce today, do you think, that will boost private sector confidence and get them to actually start investing?
So some of the issues, so while I agree with the basic points that Vinayak have made, some of the steps that they suggest are actually steps that get taken over a longer term and are perhaps not subject matter of a budget.
Right.
I think in this budget, what we will be looking at is structural steps to enhance private investment and private capital.
Okay, specifically,
yes. So thanks to the largest, for example, of central banks around the world, I think there is a lot of foreign funding available for investment across sectors, infrastructure or others.
Right.
Till now, India does not have a framework, for example, for allowing foreign capital to come in hybrid capital forms. So either foreign capital comes in as equity or it comes in as debt.
Right.
If you ask Sumant, if today he had the ability to raise capital, which was hybrid in nature, he could give downside protection to his investors, yet at the same time give them some sort of equity share returns.
Okay.
I think that would open up a new kind of capital which will invest in India.
Okay.
So in this budget, while all soundings around institutional cleanup, ease of doing business, etc., I think is hygiene. But what we would be looking to see is how do I actually stimulate private capital and investment flow through some of these structural measures.
Okay. Who better to ask than Ajit Gulabchand, Hindustan Constructions. Welcome. Great to have you on.
Thank you.
So again, just going back to what all these gentlemen are saying, are you also on the same page that as someone who's also a major player in the infra space, this business of trying to drive investment? Interestingly enough, several of them are saying that capital is not a problem, because we were led to believe that capital is also a problem because of bad debt stress with banks. Would you actually agree with that, by the way, just as a starting point, that capital is not the problem at the moment?
To say capital is not the problem is, in my opinion, untrue.
Okay.
Because when we talk of capital as a problem, is when it is the problem to attract capital for a given kind of investment.
Right.
Today also a lot of foreign capital has come in, but on projects that are already operational for several years.
Right. Not new projects.
Greenfield projects are not getting investment. Neither Indians are investing, neither foreigners are investing.
And banks are also not lending.
Second is, you can't do all equity. equity and debt are both required. And debt, I don't mean only one form of debt, many derivatives of debt, many derivatives of equity, but both these are required in a certain given blend in order to make the IRRs that are workable. For a great amount of investment to take place, you will be able to have IRRs of about 9 to 12%.
IRRs?
IRRs,
sorry.
Internal rate of return.
Right.
Now, with the interest rate so high, with equity shy of coming into the country or even from within the country, you are not getting, you need today IRRs of almost 17 to 18% in order to invest.
Wow.
That is very risky, and therefore you will not get it.
So what could,
there is a
government do, what could Nirmala Sitharaman do today, you think, to try to
I think today
create this
I don't think this can happen in one day.
Sure.
But today she can signal the direction in which the government wishes to open up the economy, to excite people to invest. I think that she can do by lowering taxes.
Okay.
That because the cost of equity is very high.
Right.
She can signal and demand a much lower interest rate. These are the two features of capital cost that she can help today to bring down.
Okay.
There are many little nitty-gritties that exist. For example,
big picture, you would say these are two steps. If I can just go across to Sumant Sinha, who is founder, chairman and CEO of Renew Power Limited. Would you also say the same, that these are some of the steps that can be taken to
No, look,
get more investment going?
Look, I think the biggest issue right now that the economic survey talked about, that Vinayak have referred to, is we have to kickstart investment somehow or the other. Now, infrastructure is a great case in point. There are three fundamental issues right now. Number one is the fact that cost of capital is very high. And number two, it's not available.
Right.
There's just not enough of it, right? And you have to keep in mind that 75% or 80% of the cost of an infrastructure project comes from debt financing sources.
Okay.
So the debt markets are not healthy, which they're not at this point in time. Then getting that level of financing becomes impossible. Either the capital is just not there or it's too expensive.
Right.
Both of those make returns on these projects unviable, and therefore the projects themselves unviable.
Right.
And so therefore that is problem number one. The second problem is that while the central government is very sincere and honest in its attempts to grow the economy and push infrastructure projects, I'm not sure that in our federal polity, the states are really on the same bus. And very often the states are pulling in a whole different direction. To give away a very simple case in point is the case of the distribution companies in the power sector. Right? The center can try whatever it might try, but unless we fix the distribution companies, we will not be able to address the 4 to 5% demand growth that the economic surveys talked about in the power sector, or the $30-40 billion of investments required in clean energy to support it, unless we fix the distribution companies. And that's squarely in the hands of state governments, with some guidance from the central government, of course.
So very quickly then, because I believe you also have to, you're going on to other panels as well. What could today at least be announced, or sort of what direction do you think that today that could help?
No, I think the first and most important thing, I agree with Ajit, is that we have to signal a reduction of interest rates in some way, shape or form. Or perhaps that, one of the problems is that while the RBI is lowering interest rates, it is not getting transmitted into the economy. Because the banking system fundamentally is not working efficiently. And the reason it's not working efficiently is because of the high NPAs that we have and a whole series of other factors. So those are things that can be addressed partly in the budget. Could be a recapitalization of the banking system at a higher level than right now. Could be lowering interest rates on provident funds. Those kinds of things perhaps are possible. That can be one way to lower the cost of capital. The second thing that can only be done, I think, is giving some signals as to what the government intends to do in different sectors to reform them and to make sure that they become better investment destinations for capital that is looking to come in. So I think those are the only things that can be done in the budget. I think most of the work will have to be done beyond the budget. It's hard work in the trenches, sort of warfare, sector by sector. You have to sort out all the problems.
Okay, I'll come to you, Ajit, in just a second, but I haven't had a chance to come to Dr. Tewari yet. Dr. Tewari, welcome.
Thank you.
What are you expecting, or what would you like to see, particularly in your area, which is healthcare?
So in the last 70 plus years, the budgetary allocation for health has been dismally low. The good thing that has happened is, with the announcement of Ayushman scheme, the government has shown commitment that health sector should move because it is an important pillar of a society.
Right.
And the expectations from the public on the ground has been raised hugely. So I am hoping that budget which was said from 1.1% will go to 2.5% in the last 5 years has not happened. So maybe today is the day where that anomaly can be fixed, because Ayushman is to cover 50 crore people.
Right.
So there are two issues. One, the affordability, the pricing and all that stuff has to be worked out. There's a huge amount of work. But there is a new sunrise here, and it's an opportunity for not only for India, but for us. There are 4 billion people around us, like Africa, Southeast Asia, CIS countries, which need the same model.
Right.
And it would be India's soft power in years to come, where we could actually help our neighboring countries to develop these kind of health systems which will give succor.
Right. Ajit.
You know, in India, if you see, on the debt side, banking is the only way to raise debt, and the banks are in trouble. And there's going to be a long time before they become healthy again.
Right.
It is a good idea. Perhaps the finance minister can signal today that they are going to implement almost all, if not at least most of the reforms recommended by the Sri Krishna Commission on Financial Sector Reforms.
Right.
Those will open up, like de-licensing, the whole financial sector.
Okay.
Separating the Office of Debt Management from the RBI will allow government bonds to compete with private ones, and therefore open up a whole new area of raising money and debt by way of bonds and their derivatives. So I think these are something that she can do very quickly.
Right.
The report exists, it's sitting, part of it was implemented. Taking that would have the same impact as de-licensing had in 1991.
Right. Pramod Batra, partner Deloitte, is here as well. Great to have you. Pramod Batra, now, when one hears some of these views from all these gentlemen, one also must ask them what has been happening in the past 5 years. Because, the sense that was conveyed by the government is that many of these issues were being tackled, ease of business has become, our rankings have improved in India, projects are being unblocked, etc., etc. But going around the table, it seems that there are still major challenges. So how does then assess what's happened, in the past 5 years?
I would say that the government in fact has improved significantly in terms of ease of doing business, from the perspective that wherever they have brought in the specific tax legislations. I'm a corporate tax person, so I'm talking more from a tax perspective.
Sure.
So the government has in fact brought in the legislation, and they have involved the participation of the various stakeholders at multiple stages, and specifically addressed multiple issues relating to the taxation of foreign companies in India, and given adequate opportunities. And so if we really look back, say beginning with when in 2012 retrospective amendments were brought in, there was a lot of hue and cry. When the new government came in, they brought in the legislation which really eased out or clarified number of propositions around indirect transfers or retrospective, and then they made a commitment that they will not be doing anything which is retrospective in nature, and everything will be prospective. So that way there is a clarity that as and when the legislation comes in, it will be more of a prospective in nature.
Right.
But yes, of course, because with the changing laws, changing times, there is a need for move at a much more faster pace rather than being little more slow. For example, in the context of corporate taxation, we are already saying that we are taxed very heavily, and if we take dividends also into account, then probably the Indian companies get taxed around 46% or so, while probably this is not the case across the globe, when the countries across the globe are really reducing their tax rates.
Right.
And and if we see yesterday's economic survey, one of the fundamentals is savings, investments, and the exports-led growth, which will take us to a 5 trillion economy.
Yes.
Now we're looking at investments and savings. That means we have to have the incentives which really boost both investment as well as the savings. Now we are if we are looking at investments for example, if we take a very basic case of ATC deductions, which is basically contributions to certain equity-led or infrastructure projects, or in the savings schemes and all, currently the limit is 150,000 Indian rupees. So basically, government should look at really increasing the ceiling, so that people
tend to save more. And same is the case of, for example, dividend taxation.
Right.
They should really change. Currently, dividend distribution tax is levied at 21% on the Indian companies.
Right.
They should really do away with that system and bring it to a historical system of withholding taxes.
Okay.
That will really align with the foreign countries.
Okay, Piyush Kambata is also here with us, Chairman Rasna Limited. Thanks for being here. Any big game-changing announcements that you think you would like to see or you think you will see?
We all want, because the government got a very big mandate.
Yes.
So now we want some very, very big, big changes. And I think they should, because it has been seen that actually the public also, the voting public is supporting reform also. The mandate has been on reforms. The more you reform, the more you got votes. I think that's what politicians like to hear.
Okay.
But there are three things, I'm just coming.
Yeah.
There are three things where I think immediate things are required.
Yes.
Number one is, the Prime Minister talked about it. Enabling private sector participation in agriculture is a must.
Okay.
Huge arena. The GDP there is not growing. It will grow if private sector goes there. So there is a large number of things which have been presented to the government in various forums, including by me personally, doubling farmers' income, how to do it, what to do it. I think a lot of that has not happened.
Okay.
And the ease of doing business is actually required in the agri sector, especially in the state level. So we expect something on that sort to happen.
So, Mr. Kambata, I know that, as you said, there's a huge menu that you may have presented to the government, but if you were to identify the one key policy decision that they could take that would help this, what would that
I
be?
think one simply put,
Yes.
the farm size in India is 1 acre. It is like saying that the whole confectionery industry would be left to SSI. What will happen? SSI Limited say, how can big ticket investment come in? So I think we need the big farm sizes, and we need the corporates not only to be buyers and suppliers of feeds, but we need to be participating in the new technology required for running these big farms.
Okay.
Now I'm not
So
saying
you're
we take the
saying
farmers land away. Make it simple. Let us say the yields are so low that we can't compete.
Right.
Why do you want to import tomato paste from China today also? Because the cost of tomato in India is not remunerated. It is cheaper to import paste from there, including the custom duty.
Right.
So how to make tomato cheaper? You need a bigger farm, you need technology, you need to improve yields. Now for that, private sector cannot be just buying and giving seeds here and there. We need to be fully participative in that farm.
Okay.
Now how do we do it without taking over the land is an issue. Contract farming, cooperative farming, corporate farming, all this has been talked about, and that is the agenda I can't talk in 2 minutes.
Sure.
But that is the big picture thing coming in. Number two, I believe that the food processing is seen separately from agriculture. So for example, tomato sauce is at 12% tax, while tomato is at 0% GST. And similarly, if you do agriculture, there is no income tax, but in food processing, you have to pay all the taxes. We just talked about it. So I believe that the taxes need to come down. And at least for food processing, all the taxes should be at par with agriculture, including the electric duty also, and the electricity charge tariff also.
Okay.
So that is the number two. There are two more quick things I like to say.
Yes.
Export is a real, across agriculture, food processing, is a real, how do we really bring it up?
Right.
And that's once again ease of doing business is required.
Okay.
The trade facilitation, if you see in the rankings, it did rise, but there is a lot we can do there.
Okay.
We are not able to compete with the countries importing like China and all. So we have once again believe that lot needs to be done there.
Okay.
And I still believe that exporters need to be made income tax free. They were earlier, they were.
Right.
So we really need to help.
Okay. So
Third and the last thing is, very most important, is employment creation. This government's biggest negative is employment creation. To create employment, you will need to incentivize industry in a big way. I think industry is employing what I call the so to speak, employees, not on the roll employees, I would say contract or whatever word you want to call it. We need to incentivize industry to get employees on their rolls by giving deductions, by giving tax breaks, and create more employment, especially.
That's a very important point that you raised about job creation, something that we will get into. We have to take a short break at this point, I'm told. We come back and we look particularly at jobs and how the government can help tackle that problem. Welcome back. Now just about 30 minutes before Nirmala Sitharaman, who we can see there at Parliament, is about to make her first budget speech of Modi 2.0. We have Mr. M.S. Unikrishnan, MD and CEO Thermax India, here with us at our gathering of the captains of industry here at CII at the Meridian. Mr. Unikrishnan, before we took a break, one of the challenges that we were talking about is job creation, which is something that many people feel that this government has not been able to do to the extent that it should have. What do you think is holding that back as someone who's from industry, and what could the government do or announce today which could help that?
Capacity building has tottered for the past maybe 2.5 years because the consumption and the demand for goods in the market has come down.
Right.
And primary reason for that is money in the hand of the consumer has come down in the rural area. It starts off with the rural distress. So we are able to ensure that consumption increases.
Right.
Then the capacities will get utilized. So
Of industry.
Of industry or anything.
Right.
Yeah. So the commodity, whether it is agriculture products, farm products to industrial products to durables to FMCG to capital goods put together. So the capacity utilization in the country was topping at something like 65% maybe a 2 year back, improved to 75-80 when we started seeing some improvement in that area.
Right.
But all of a sudden the past 6 months again the utilization has come down.
Right.
So that is one area where we need to be ensuring that both the government investment and private investment is supported, so that there is a frenzy which happened in the country sometime back in 2003 to 2008. Capacity building happened everywhere. Unless that happens, job creation is not going to be happening.
Okay, that's a very blunt assessment. So you're saying unless you, in a sense, empower or enrich rural consumers who are right at the bottom of the consumption pyramid, everything builds up from there.
Correct.
So very quickly, how would you expect the government to do that? Because one of the things they did do before the elections was announce, for example, that PM Kisan scheme, right, which is a kind of cash transfer to farmers.
Yeah.
Are you saying that will help? More of that? What else?
Direct transfer in the hands of the person will go to idle consumption. Productive consumption what we need to be looking forward to.
Yes.
If you really look at it in the past maybe 5-year period of time,
Right.
the total capital formation of the country has come down from 32 to 25%. That 5% delta has happened in where? It's in the household investment, not in the private investment. It's fundamentally the household investment.
Okay.
So the demand for automobile is coming down, demand for white goods are coming down. How do we ensure that kind of set of people are migrating from a normal level to the next level has got money in the hand?
Right.
So what could be done? One of the minimum wages act which the government is almost going to do now, we have to make it uniform, or
Yes.
ensuring that there is people are coming out of the poverty level and there is money available for investment.
Okay.
That's the first thing. Second is government has got to be ensuring that there is a conducive atmosphere for labor to be employed by the government.
Right.
If you look at in the ease of doing business, which my friend would have spoken, Firoz would have spoken about that, the area where we are even now rated very low in the ranking in the global is the labor laws of the country, dealing with that one. So that is something which the government is expected to be taking care of.
The economic survey did, in fact, mention that. Rahul Munjal is with us, CMD, Hero Future Energies Private Limited. On job creation, would you agree with what Mr. Unikrishnan has said, or what would you say is the primary obstacle that you as a businessman face in job creation?
Yes. So I would agree with most of what Mr. Unikrishnan is saying, but I would like to add a few things to it. It's also the interest rate. If you see, the interest rate in the country is very, very high. Job creation is going to come from infrastructure. Infrastructure spends are going to come from partly from the government, but mainly from the private sector. But the private sector today cannot invest in infrastructure as much as it could because of high interest rates and because of legacy issues of what we've seen with the NPAs, etc.
Right.
So where we have to solve for the NPAs and we have to take care of the legacy issues, but we have to focus on the interest rate as well. Till the interest rate doesn't go down, the infrastructure spending from the private will not come in. And that is one of the largest job creators in the country.
So when you talk of interest rates not coming down, the RBI, of course, is making attempts to try to reduce interest rates, and that's one of the things that the economic survey spoke about. But you're saying in real terms, that's not translating into
So there are two parts to
actual
it.
lending by banks.
There is liquidity, credit, and interest rates.
Right.
So the interest rates in the hand of the end consumer or an industry is still not come down, it's still gone up. And in the hands of a consumer who is an automobile consumer, it's not there at all. So credit in the auto market is extremely low, is the lowest it's been in the past many, many years.
Yes.
So there is a lot of financial discipline that needs to be brought about in order to kickstart the GDP from where it is, in order to take it to the 8% growth that we all envision.
Okay, but apart from all of this, there's always this business of animal spirits that we keep hearing about, and the economic survey also mentioned that and said that now with a 300 plus majority, this is going to unlock animal spirits. But, and this is something I couldn't ask the chief economic advisor when I interviewed him last time, but I asked him that you also got that huge majority in 2014, right? If that didn't unlock animal spirits, then where is the problem?
See, a lot got fundamentally done after 2014, to be fair to this government.
Right.
GST for the first time, we've been talking about GST since 1999 perhaps. GST for the first time became a reality. So in terms of business, lots actually got transacted by this government in its first term.
Right.
The expectation now is, and for me the fundamental expectation, and a lot of people here on the panel have spoken about tax rate cuts, etc. I don't think the government today has the fiscal headroom available to do this. I also think that with the kind of investment spend required, both within the government and the private sector, the government's focus will not be on the tax cuts. I think what we would rather see though is that various pools of capital are available. He spoke about debt and the problem with high interest rates. Similarly, there is a hybrid or mezzanine source of capital available from financial investors. What the government needs to do is to make India the most competitive market to be able to attract those funds. And for that, whatever is needed from a policy and regulatory standpoint is what we can expect to hear today. Whatever is needed from an ease of doing business standpoint, etc., is something the government is in any case doing.
Right.
But in terms of today's expectation, we should be clear that if the focus is investment, whatever the government can do on a policy framework to enable that investment is what we should be looking for.
Okay. I'll just come to you in a second. I haven't had a chance to go to Mr. Arun Kumar, who's Chairman, CEO, KPMG. What is that one decision that you think could be taken that, as he says, at the policy level, that could incentivize businesses?
Well, I don't know if there's one silver bullet or one magic decision.
Okay, two silver bullets.
Well, I think a number of them were actually spoken about.
Right.
I certainly believe that infrastructure is an area that can be very stimulative to create employment. It also will reduce the cost of doing business in many ways.
Right.
Better infrastructure, better logistics, combined with the GST that was just mentioned too.
Yes.
So I think any big moves in infrastructure, which actually needs some financing mechanisms to sort it out, because the infrastructure spending is long-term. We don't really have adequate mechanisms to ensure that that kind of spending can be done both by the private and the public sector. So that would be one key area that I would look for, to see what can be done to ensure that infrastructure spending continues to be a stimulus to the economy.
But as far as, and this is also like a legacy overhang, a large number of stalled infrastructure projects that were held up either because of credit issues or because of regulatory, hurdles. How would you, rate the government's success in trying to unblock some of those? Because there is a considerable amount of hype around the fact that they've managed to do that, but in real terms, has that happened?
There have been some great successes. National Highway Authorities was a good example of assets being created and recycled. I think we just need to do more of that kind of asset recycling. Clearly, there are a number of governance issues, control issues, etc., that need to be in place, because when money is spent, it's got to be done in the right way to get the right returns to the right stakeholders.
Right.
So yes, all of those things need to be done.
Okay. Let me just quickly go around the table before we lose you gentlemen, to just get a sense from you as to whether you believe that in the past 5 years, the sort of attempts that were made to try to reform, to try to kickstart the economy, really match the kind of mandate that the government received? Or was there a bit of a disappointment, given again the fact that they had this remarkable mandate, starting with you?
So I think the disappointment came as a surprise. I don't think it was a disappointment which was intended to be a disappointment. I think the efforts from the government were full on. I think they tried all that, they put policies in place and procedures in place which were fantastic, and in the long run we'll see the benefit of it.
Yeah.
But in the short term, so there is a short-term gain. It's almost like labor pain. You have to go through the pain to get to the gain. So we're in the pain part. So the idea is how quickly do you get out of this pain and to go into the game, because there are some fabulous, the NCLT court, there are some very, very good reforms that took place. But to get
the insolvency and banking code, which
yes,
right.
Yes. So I'm saying just like that, there are many other reforms that took place. GST was another one. The success of, so there is success of many programs. I don't want to go into the details of the programs. But the point is, we will continue those programs. That's great. And the second part is, and now because enough time is gone, so whatever had to come in through time, the benefits of time will also seep in now.
So I think if they continue on the same agenda as they had, I agree with what Mr. Unikrishnan was saying. We have to, at the end of the day, we're a poor nation, we have to take care of the poor first. Right. But at the same time, we need to take care of the industries as well, because industries are the employers of the nation. Mr. Unikrishnan, do you think that the government's reformist or economic agenda has been bold enough to match the mandate they got, or not quite?
Absolutely right. I would say that it is a correction that to be doing after they coming into power. So whatever they have achieved in the first 5 years is remarkable in my understanding. We were part of what was happening earlier also in the country. So the way the corrections had to be done for an economy which was in the major difficulty, cleanup is done already. Right. So the current mandate available to them is to ensure that what they promised in the first is implemented right now. I was just wanting to answer to what you mentioned about earlier.
Yes.
India is still dependent upon equity market, which is a very expensive item. A creation of a bond market and insurance support for the industry is what India has to evolve into if you could have a private capital coming into an investment to be kept up. So that is something which I am expecting, that whether it comes as a part of the budget or separately, unless you create that, there won't be fund available. Please remember, only 30% can come as equity, whereas 70% has got to come from debt sources, and debt can't be only the banking system. That with the current problems that Indian banking system is facing, we need to at a very fast pace create a bond market in the country, make it viable, and also insurance to support also people move out of debt into these two instruments. Then we can expect things to be happening faster.
Okay, I have more voices joining us from corporate India here at our round table at CII Meridian. We will come to all of them, take a short break, and then I promise you no more breaks till the budget speech. We are live from Meridian CII as we now count down to the budget. Nirmala Sitharaman there, first at Rashtrapati Bhavan with the budget papers, now at Parliament, just 15 minutes left. The markets seem to be a bit jittery. They open strong, but they seem to be a bit shaky. It's not quite clear why that is. These are the mysterious ways of the market, because as you very well know. Look, there you go. There we have the Sensex up there. Just look at what has happened in the past hour. Could one reason for the jitteriness be this inheritance tax speculation which has been going on since yesterday?
That itself is speculative, if that causes speculation. No, I can't figure out the reason, but just to your earlier point, what are these couple of important things that should be on the government's priority?
Yeah.
Again, picking up some clues from the economic survey.
Yeah.
The FDI trend, which looked extremely positive in major parts of the Modi 1 regime, suddenly looked flattened and negative.
Right. Foreign direct investment.
So I think one should pick up clue from there, and this is despite the fact that on ease of doing business index, the World Bank ranking for 2017, 2018.
So boosting foreign direct investment is important. I'm going to keep moving because time is very short. Vinod Sharma is here from Deki Electronics. Thank you, Mr. Sharma, for being here. You would have any theories about why the market is jittery, or?
No, I don't.
No, too soon.
But yeah, it's too soon.
Too soon. But overall, again, going back to what the economic survey was talking about getting a boost in investment, particularly private sector investment, which has continued to be on the decline. Is that realistic? Is that going to happen? What will it take to make that happen? In your point of view?
It's certainly realistic, and we hope in the industry that that will happen.
Okay.
Let me speak from two accounts. One is from an MSME perspective, and there was a lot written in the economic survey about it. A lot is expected from the MSMEs. I think they basically need two things. At the moment, there is a whole liquidity issue. Funds being blocked up by invoices unpaid by the government and by large companies. So there needs to be, I think the government has started doing a few things around the TREDS platform and stuff like that. It should be able to bring in liquidity into their market. So today, they don't have money either. The banks have tightened up, they are not giving the money, and neither are the larger companies or the government paying up on time.
Right.
The second point I want to make is from our sector, which is electronics. This is largely an import-dependent sector. We've seen some excellent work happening in the last 5 years, especially in the area of mobile phone assembly at least.
Yes.
And we hope that that will now go down to the next level through the phased manufacturing program, wherein we will be able to successfully compete in manufacturing versus one country, which is China.
Right. So these are the things which you think are important. Well, Sunil Kant Punjal is joining us, Chairman Hero Enterprises. Great to have you. We just are about 10 minutes away from the budget. So quick window for you to make your predictions and your wish list. Particularly I wanted to ask you because we've seen this kind of shrinking that people have been talking about in the economy and particularly in the auto sector. So just to understand first what's going wrong, what's creating this pressure in your view?
If you think back, over the last 14 or 16 quarters, we've had a negative capital gross formation, except 1 or 2 quarters.
Right.
So what has helped the economy because capital formation certainly in the private sector has not been happening. So what has helped the economy along is consumption.
Right.
But since the NBFCs got into this log jam and banks have become risk averse, exactly as you were saying, consumption had taken a big hit. And the global slowdown, barring the US, is not helping this at all.
Right.
So we are actually in a little bit of a spot at this moment, and it appears, take 2 to 4 quarters more for us to get out of it, unless we hear something interesting in the budget today.
Right.
So if you have something completely innovative, let's say, for example, refinance bank for NBFCs, okay? That could be a completely out-of-the-box solution, which could get this thing off the ground right away. Otherwise, it's a slow climb up. The banks need recapitalization, and banks are also very risk averse at this moment because of the policies that we follow, that a bank manager can be picked up post-retirement and put behind bars for a decision taken with the knowledge that they had at that moment. And so I think we need to create this distinction in policy between malintent and impact of economy, industry, etc., because of which companies or projects go bad.
Right.
And overall, I think there is a need for us to look at the 4 or 5 big areas which can have an impact. Entire rural economy, so in a sense freeing up agriculture, as we did for the rest of the economy in 91. By the way, we never freed up agriculture. Please remember, the reform never happened in agriculture, did not happen as much in the criminal justice system. There are 2 or 3 areas which kind of got left behind. So it may be an opportunity, because the government has come with such a massive mandate.
Yes.
It has massive political capital available as well. I would hope to see a 5-year statement of intent of government and a 10 to 20-year statement for where the country should be going in the kind of budget. And I hope a focus back on things like outcomes rather than only outlays.
Okay, so what do you mean by that specifically?
When you don't say I'm spending so many crores on education, that by the way, by spending so many crores, I will create so many schools, this quality of schools, so much more faculty, we will train so many more teachers, and therefore we will get this result.
Right.
Because only outlays is never good enough.
Okay. But I just want to quickly, before I move on, take you up on that point where you said that there has been this slowing down of investment by the private sector, and to say that how you would unblock it, you were saying that one of the ways is to stop this kind of almost victimization and harassment of bank officials, and 2, as you mentioned, this idea of having an NBFC bank. Could that unblock, could that spur private investment, or will it take more?
It will take more. We need to lower taxes. So a cost of capital in India is today amongst the highest in the world of any large economy.
Yes.
Cost of funding, cost of interest, cost of capital, all are amongst the highest in the world at this moment.
Right.
And our GST, which is a superb system, needs more streamlining.
So you have to work at multiple levels to get this thing going.
Yeah.
And it's entirely possible to do, by the way.
Okay.
And I think the government is quite aware of this.
Right.
In the conversations that industry has been having with the government, there's a lot of discussion going on about now lowering taxes to 18%. That 25% was a conversation we were having earlier, if you remember. But now the entire world is moving down from 18 to 15, and some are even talking about 12.
Okay.
We were in the UK in the CIS mission only last week.
Sure.
There they have a stated position. The tax rate, corporate tax is 19%. Next year it's going to 17%.
Wow.
So we need to have a clear roadmap pre-announced, and no jerky movements on policy changes. That's the other issue which the world is saying about India.
We have Mr. Raja Navani and the Jetline Group also joining us with the clock running out, Mr. Navani. This is your chance, because it is, as several people have been saying, it was a big bang result in the elections, but will it be big bang when it comes to policy? That seems a little unclear. What are you expecting? What would you like to say?
I am optimistic. I am definitely optimistic that we will hear a lot of big bang announcements, particularly in the areas that we've been talking about. I think spurring growth is very, very critical for India right now, and I think the key aspect that I'm really looking forward to is how can we really move from the startup India, which was 1.0 Modi government, to now scale up India, and scale up at all levels. I think companies that have started to grow and the entrepreneurial spirit that has got unleashed, how do you create ease of business, lowering taxes, giving incentives that can enable those companies to scale up now? And I think even the large companies, which are large from an India context, at a global level, we don't have a single company in the top 100. We have 7 companies in the top 500. For the fastest growing economy in the world, I think that's unacceptable.
Right.
So we got to find ways in which our companies can grow large, which will create job creation. And I think the trigger that we have is a lot around future and new age businesses. Artificial intelligence led leapfrogging in the world, providing global leadership. Already a lot of our technology and talent from India is actually demonstrating that in other markets in the world. So I think we have the oil of data, for example. How do we leverage that? Because when you look at the top 10 companies, most of them are oil companies, right? So if data is the new oil, how do we leverage that as India and get into that new leadership position? And I think I'm excited about a lot of announcements coming in those areas.
Okay, so those are very broad brush, ambitious wish list that you announced. But if you were to just distill it into 1 or 2 concrete budget announcements, because a lot of what you're talking about is off budget as well, like years of fixing plumbing, government plumbing, regulatory plumbing. But 1 or 2 big announcements in the budget that you think will help us
I think the direction
close to what you were talking about.
I think the direction on lowering of corporate taxes definitely is a big trigger to create incentive on capital allocation into this sector. And I think second, a lot of emphasis towards skilling and training towards new age businesses. I think as I say, we are in that era of creative destruction where old jobs are being lost and new jobs will have to come to the fore. So how does the government actually allocate and look at outcomes in some of those areas is something
in a sustainable manner. We have to be very careful right now. The problem of air pollution, water distress is very rare.
Right, climate change.
It's
none of us have spoken about it.
And this generation, our generation, is the only one who can fix this, by the way. It will be too late after this.
Right.
So anything that we do must keep that in mind.
That's a very important point. I wish we had more time to talk about that, but perhaps we will later on. Chandrajit Banerjee, because on the one hand, welcome, by the way, to your own party in a sense. But in a sense, this business of corporate tax, which everyone feels should be lowered, and there is an expectation that it will be. But again, offset that with the fact that the government is actually looking to spend more on this huge basket of welfare schemes that it seems to be adding to constantly, right? So we just had the big PM Kisan announcement before the elections, which again the government has now universalized, so that's going to cost even more money. How do you reconcile these two things? And is it realistic then to expect tax cuts?
So, number one, yes, there is it for
very, very important for India to get onto that roadmap to show that we are going to be competitive vis-a-vis our tax rate. It's not just the corporate tax, but if you look at the tax on equity, say for instance, this makes us completely unviable for any business investments. Sure. Having said that, if you are really moving towards, when we talked about 25% tax, when we talk about 18% tax, which we have recommended without and removing all exemptions over a period of time, if we are able to make more and more companies gravitate towards 25 and thereafter more, obviously you rekindle the animal spirit, which brings in more economic activity, more revenue to the government anyway. So we're saying that's what you may lose in terms of tax revenue. And historically it's been proved that whenever you moderate tax rates, you do not you actually end up getting more revenues because economic activity grows up, industry would really be investing much more. So obviously there will be much more which will accrue to the government. So that's going to be very critical. And second, another point that we are saying, when we are looking at the fiscal, look at it carefully, look at the quality of your revenues and expenditure, just instead of looking at the numbers. Create an index which will look at what type of expenditure you are making, where are you putting in education, where are you putting in healthcare. So I think that's going to be, so the FRBM needs to be a little flexible looking at what the quality of revenue and expenditure. But will this happen, you think? On corporate tax, this is the moment for India. I mean, you have that mandate, you have to have strong reforms, you have to talk about labor. You cannot just not talk about labor. So you need strong reforms. When you are talking about employment growth in India, which is extremely important, if you do not touch labor reforms, which will actually increase employment and rather sort of think that any labor reform will be anti-labor, is a completely wrong way of looking at things, and industry will not come in with the type of spirit to invest.
Okay. Revenue can be increased, not just by lowering taxes, but by using the data and information already available with the Revenue Department. GST is an amazing storehouse of knowledge with the government on companies. Okay. Moment you look at companies, it's very easy to look at who works in the company and who owns that company. Are they all paying taxes or not? It's a simple question to ask. Okay. Now, if the two systems, indirect taxes and direct taxes, start talking to each other, which was, by the way, designed 15 years ago, it was kind of patchy working, but now it's a much more sophisticated system in place. Okay. With an amazing amount of data. Data analytics is a tool which is available, to the point Rajan made earlier. Artificial intelligence to be applied in here will be most productive for this country.
Okay, interesting. Quick round from everybody now, because we're now just moments away from the budget. Do you agree with what Chandrajit was saying, that it's a kind of now or never moment? The government has come with this mandate, elections aren't another 5 years away. So you can take bold moves like with, for example, labor reforms.
Absolutely. I think they have the mandate and they have the ability to take the risks and they have the 5 years to go, and they can, if they want to do any corrections next year, they can always do that.
Right. Mr. Langru?
Yeah, the biggest issue is liquidity. I think the money supply has to get into the economy. Liquidity, there's a rumor of a stress fund which the budget is going to announce, but NDTV to be capital. Labor reforms and infrastructure are the key,
These are the key.
And we do need to we have widened the tax base, tax rate should come down.
Okay. Mr. Attorney, because again, let's remember that we cannot sort of have these conversations in a vacuum. This is a government that is, like all governments, sensitive to the political headwinds. There may not be Lok Sabha elections for 5 years, but there are assembly elections coming up soon. So how do you balance, political prudence with
I think the
fiscal
I would say that the last 5 years have shown that the government's taking risks, whether it was demonetization, whether it was introduction of GST, and I think they've come out looking a lot better than what many people would have expected. So I think they know how to take the political risk, they know how to make that happen, and I think the labor reform that everyone said, I think is one of the key agenda items. I would add one more, that I think from a tax point of view, there could be limited headroom unless they're also exploring non-tax revenue options. And I think it's time to also look at privatization as something that should come back on the agenda.
Right. Okay.
So labor and
I rise to present the budget for the year 2019-20. The recent election, which brought us to this august house today,